Hello and welcome to the first episode of Business Tuesday in 2021. I hope you're doing great and you're in the right shape. I'm Chris Owino and today I'm privileged to be joined on board by Mr. Andrew Chimphonda CEO Shelter Afrique. We're equally grateful to have you on board.
Great stuff. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so without much ado, let's just get straight into it.
Okay.
Maybe for the sake of our viewer, you can just tell them who is Mr. Andrew Chimphonda to begin with.
To begin with.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Ndinaitwa Andrew Chimphonda, bwana mkubwa wa Shelter Afrique. Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there's a faction of our viewer, one or two, that perhaps have no clue about Shelter Afrique. I know it's a name that doesn't need much introduction,
Yes.
but you can just tell our viewer more about Shelter Afrique, who is Shelter Afrique and what you do,
Fantastic. So the name Shelter Afrique is French.
Yes.
What it basically means is housing for Africa. So Shelter Afrique is the bank in Africa that is focused on funding low-cost housing. So Shelter Afrique is actually owned by 44 countries in Africa, 44 countries, plus of course our key strategic partner and shareholder, the African Development Bank and Africa Reinsurance Corporation. So you've got 46 shareholders, and what we do is very, very simple. We have one clear vision, that is to provide housing for all in Africa. We want people to be removed from slums so that they are housed in decent accommodation. So how do we do it? We are a wholesale market maker. What we do is, on the supply side, we give funding to developers, only those that want to build low-cost, high-volume or large-scale housing. Let me give you an example. So a one-bedroom house, they must be able to sell it for like 1 million Kenyan shillings. A two-bedroom, 2 million Kenyan shillings, or a three-bedroom, 3 million Kenyan shillings. Low-cost, high-volume. On the demand side, our job is now to fund banks that want to provide mortgage loans. Why? Because at the end of the day, there's a shortage of long-term financing for banks to be able to give mortgages to the people that are going to buy those houses. So we are a wholesale market maker. We operate in all 44 countries, and of course we are very grateful to the government of Kenya to host our head office here in the wonderful city of Nairobi.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes.
So when did you make inroad into our country?
Well, Shelter Afrique has been in existence 38, now it will be 40 years this year, 40 years ago, etc. And we've done quite a few projects in Kenya and also in other African countries. And we've been very grateful. We've been hosted well by the government of Kenya. Our minister, who's actually the chairman of, or the president of our shareholders bureau, is called the AGM Bureau. Mr. Honorable Macharia is the chair, and then of course PS Charles Hinga, the PS for Housing, is a board member on the Shelter Afrique board, chairing our audit and risk committee.
Absolutely amazing. Now, let's talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. I know it has had adverse effects on all the spectrum of life, politically, economically, and socially.
Yes.
From the business standpoint,
Yeah.
how has it affected your firm locally and globally?
Yes. So COVID-19 is a global pandemic, but when we look at it locally, it's affected us as Shelter Afrique, the way we do business. Firstly, Chris, we used to work from offices. I've only come to this interview in my office because I was told you are coming, but our staff actually work from home. So what is done is it has forced us to make sure that we develop more on our digital transformation side to make sure that we make it possible for each employee to work from home. So we've had to capacitate each employee with a laptop, and we had to improve our systems so that we can conduct meetings successfully from home. We've managed to do it. This is from a Shelter Afrique point of view. But strategically, we've said as Shelter Afrique, because you cannot control the COVID virus, all you can do is look at what does the opportunities bring with COVID-19. So what does it bring? It means we should support government initiatives like Build Kenya, Buy Kenya. We should support the African countries now to be more self-sustainable in terms of the purchasing of building materials, our dependency across the countries was mostly importing like from countries like China, etc. With COVID coming in place, the borders were blocked. Projects were stopped because most of their inputs into the projects was coming from China. They couldn't receive those. Not only that, projects were also stopped because of the fact that you couldn't now have social distancing and adequate measures in line with the prescripts of the World Health Organization as you are constructing those projects. So yes, if I look at what has happened with our customers have come to Shelter Afrique to ask for their loans to be restructured, in the sense that they wanted maybe longer grace periods. They also wanted more time to repay the loans because they were also impacted. You must understand that when the individual Mwananchi is affected by COVID-19, either he's lost a job, it means he can't pay his bond or he can't pay his rent. It also has a ripple effect on the landlords or the developers that have developed those units, etc. And across the spectrum of Kenya, you'll find that certain industries were affected more than others, like the hospitality. Even I think the occupancies dropped below 20%.
Yes.
The rentals, in terms of residential accommodation, the landlords had to renegotiate, either give rent-free periods, even commercially, or they had to also give discounts on the rent. So the rents came down, even the rental yields also, came down. This has been as an advent of COVID-19, but not only in Kenya, also in other countries in Africa and also, of course, in the world. So what we've done as Shelter Afrique is we've accepted that COVID is here to stay. We've readjusted the way we do business, and we are continuing to do business. We are not stopping, because at the end of the day, we believe that of the 56 million people in Africa that need a house, we have a big role to play. Of course, it differs with country. Kenya, the shortage may be 2 million, Nigeria may be 22 million, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, we cannot stop executing on our mandate, because it's more important than Shelter Afrique, it's more important than myself, and our board has instructed us to strictly focus on executing on our mandate.
Yeah, COVID-19 is here to stay. Quite sad, but that is stark reality.
Yeah.
There is a faction of people that are of the view that perhaps this is a wake-up call for African countries to revamp their medical scheme and their healthcare system at large going forward. You as Shelter Afrique, what do you make of it?
Look, I think when you say some people, those people are correct, because you go to South Africa as a government has had a challenge to cope with COVID-19. It's had the largest cases of COVID-19 on the African continent. You find hospitals cannot take people in because there's no capacity. So COVID patients are being treated from their own homes. You see, you look at any other countries within Africa, COVID-19 has affected them. So yes, it's correct that if it wasn't for COVID-19, the budgets into the healthcare system would not have been at the scale that has been negotiated and approved today because of COVID-19. So yes, it's important that investment, maybe it was long overdue, but COVID-19 kind of catalyzed that investment into the healthcare system. Another case, we are Africans. Why do we have to then wait for Europe to bring vaccines? Surely we've got a lot of technically intellectual people within Africa where if we work together as Africans, we should be able to develop the COVID vaccine for Africa. Those are things that, of course, we have to ponder over and think about, because at the end of the day, whether it's Europe, Russia, or whoever is developing vaccines, that intellectual capital also resides within the professionals within the African continent too.
Right, it's our hope that the governments of the day and the private sectors actually in our continent will give it much prominence that it deserves.
Agreed, Chris.
Okay, moving forward, let's now talk about your partnership with NCPBA. You actually signed a partnership with 5 countries. So maybe you can just walk us through some of those countries that you partnered with NCPBA to finance housing.
Yes. So NCBA is a very critical and important strategic partner for Shelter Afrique. We decided to enter into a partnership with them in the counties that relate to Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Kiambu, and Machakos. Now, this partnership really revolves around us as Shelter Afrique being able to deliver housing units in those counties, NCBA as a bank making sure that the people that want to buy those houses have access to mortgages, have access to financing, because at the end of the day, without making sure that as the houses units are being produced, there's also take-up. The take-up happens through access to finance, etc. Then you have a disconnect. So we're very excited with the partnership with NCBA. We believe it will be a successful partnership, and we believe that it's going to improve the uptake of mortgages for the people living in those counties.
Yeah, so somebody might ask what was the criteria that was used to identify Kisumu, Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kiambu out of the remaining towns in the country? What was the criteria, perhaps?
Look, I think a very good question, Chris. I think for us, it was just predicated on the counties where Shelter Afrique already has housing units, and it was a question of now looking for a strategic partner to be able to fund the units so that the ordinary mwananchi or resident in those respective counties has access to actually purchase the house, which now if they pay off the mortgage, they're going to own the house.
Yeah, so would you mind delving into the amount that actually you poured into this partnership?
Okay, well, so perhaps what you're looking at is, I think currently you're looking at about 200 million, let me be more specific. Currently you're looking at the 200 units that we've developed at Shelter Afrique, and if you just work on an average of, let's call it maybe 10 million per housing unit, that is the quantum of the partnership. But you see, for us, 200 units is just the beginning of the partnership. We obviously plan to grow the partnership by developing more units for NCB and other banks also for that matter to be able to fund. But we needed to at least start somewhere with NCBA, and we look forward to having similar partnerships with other institutions, in fact other banks in Kenya, because generally what you find with banks, when you have a project, they will not want to fund 100%. Banks like to diversify their risk. So you find when NCBA funds, they may want to fund maybe 30% or 40%, and then Equity Bank can come through KCBA, etc., and things like that. So the NCBA partnership is one of many partnerships that we want to formulate within the country. And over and above that, we feel we need to help the end users by helping them get access to affordable housing finance.
Yes, so I know by the time you enter in this kind of partnership, government had its target. Perhaps you can just highlight how it's going to benefit the government of the day.
Okay.
Yes. All
right. So the Big Four agenda, which we support, the President, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, is to deliver 500,000 units of housing. What we believe as Shelter Afrique is that you have to develop the supply side of housing, which are the housing units, but make sure that the units are at an affordable cost so that people can afford to buy. And then you have to develop the supply of the finance, which is the financing. So how the government benefits, number one, Shelter Afrique, as you know, has invested $2 million US dollars into the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company that allows the banks to lend into the affordable housing space. I think in addition, the fact that we are developing units, all those units get counted into the units that are provided when you try to come up with the numbers of affordable housing targets that have been set by the government within the auspices of the Big Four agenda. So what is government working on now? Of course, what government is working on, I don't know if you've been to Park Road.
Yes, Park Road of late, yeah.
Yeah, you've been to Park Road.
Yes.
Okay, so the government has already developed, it should be about 488 units, which are already complete, but the Park Road initiative is 1,370 units. So we as Shelter Afrique look and say, how do we support any funding gap so that those units are built quickly? You know, Pangani is also up and running, but it's work in progress, 1,562 units. We also have Kitui with about 509 units. And of course, there's a lot of projects out there in Kibera. I'm sure you've been to Kibera. Kibera South, if you look at Kibera, Soweto, the East Zone, there's another 3,000 being developed, and Stare and Shauri Moyo. So there's a lot of plans and projects. But what is important in housing is the physical delivery of the units, because that is what's important. And we as Shelter Afrique look into the value chain to see where are the challenges or gaps, and we try to plug them, because we are a developmental financial institution. We do more than a bank. We accept the risk together with government so that in the end we deliver the housing units.
Speaking of 200 million US dollar, it's a colossal amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
What actually
$2 million.
200?
For
It's $2 million.
This actually, speaking of
Are
2
you
million
talking
US
MRC?
dollar, yes.
yeah,
We are talking about RMSC.
Let me see.
Yeah,
Kenya Mortgage
Kenya
Finance
Mortgage
Company
Finance
Yes.
is $2 million
$2 million.
Okay.
for Kenya Mortgage, but 200 million, of
Kenyan
course.
shillings.
There's the 1 billion project
Yeah.
to invest in housing, which is a bit separate from the $2 million KMRC. So that will be 200 million shilling for KMRC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that leads at the next question. That is, maybe you can tell our viewer more about the $1 billion US dollar strategic plan for 2019-2023 and the 20 million US dollar yearly capital investment plan as well.
Okay. So, Chris, thank you very much. You see, Shelter Afrique over 5 years
Yes.
wants to invest 1 billion US dollars. So 1 billion US dollars in shillings would be 100 billion shillings. That's correct?
Yeah.
Or maybe 109 billion shillings, depending on where the exchange rate is. Yes.
Yes.
So we as Shelter Afrique, this means that we want to ensure that we're investing at least 200 million per annum. We can do it through our own funds, which we raise from the member countries that contribute to Shelter Afrique. We can do it through raising debt as Shelter Afrique, and then using that debt to be able to lend to developers and also to banks. Banks, we give them money through lines of credit because we're a wholesale market maker. Then developers, we give them money through, of course, the debt capital. So all in all, that amount of money that we want to invest, when you compare it with the shortage of housing in Africa, it's not that much, but it's a start, because at the end of the day, we want to make an intervention, you see. So what do? The biggest problem you'll find in Africa is that although we are getting our money in US dollars, some banks do not want to take US dollars. Like for instance, maybe banks in East Africa and also in Nigeria, they want local currency. So we as Shelter Afrique are working on a plan to look at how can we issue local currency bonds in the likes of Nigeria, in the likes of the West Africa side, and also in East Africa bond. That's something which has not happened, but we as Shelter Afrique want to take the initiative, issue an East Africa bond, which will now cover Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda. And how it works then, Chris, is that then developers and banks are able to access funding from Shelter Afrique, but in their local currency. They don't have to deal with the foreign exchange risk, which is usually very expensive to hedge or to cover.
Mm-hmm. So, brilliant. I have to admit that it's a very colossal amount of money in a ambitious plan.
Yes.
Yes. Now, maybe you can tell us some of the challenges that you face in the housing industry, more so in Kenya.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you see, the thing about housing is that you can't talk about what you've delivered unless you show someone the housing unit, you see.
Mm-hmm.
So housing is a very practical industry in terms of delivery. The challenge we find is that, let's talk about Kenya. Sometimes the cost of the land is expensive. You find it can even be 40% of the cost of the unit. When you compare it with the cost of the land in other countries, that's a challenge. Other challenges is that when people want to fund housing, they want security of the money they're putting in through the title deeds. In other markets, like for instance Nigeria, it may take too long for you to get the actual title deed. So the title deed system across the African countries needs to be improved. Some people talk about blockchain, coming up with initiatives and technology to improve it, but that is work in progress. The other issues around tribal land, whereby you might have a permission to occupy, people are looking for title deeds. All of those things will need to be improved. And of course, the other thing is the time it takes for things like drawings to be approved and things like that are areas which give room for improvement. But having said that, that won't deter us from the execution of our mandate. Like you say in business, it's about how you handle the challenges so that in the end of the day, you deliver the end product, which is a housing unit. And across the board, the challenge with developers is having funding or cash that kind of aligns with their project cycle to be able to model the cash flows that can match them being able to complete the project. Sometimes the project takes longer than the time the funding has been given for. So a developer is told they've defaulted because the two timelines are not aligned. But we at Shelter Afrique, we work with that understanding and we give longer term funding. That is why we are unique. No other bank can give the funding in terms of the loan terms we give, in terms of the grace periods we give. However, we need to improve on the pricing because the pricing is a function of the cost at which we raise funds. We come up with the weighted average cost of financing.
I appreciate it. So, have you deemed it fit to bring these challenges to the government and see how they tackle these challenges? Like, for instance, the cost of lands in the country, of buying lands in the country. Maybe you shared with the relevant government ministry. What's their take?
Yes. So we also develop housing policy for Africa. We are working on through our Center of Excellence. We are working on a model housing policy for Africa, which we will share with all governments, including the Kenyan government. But fortunately, because we are owned by those 44 governments,
yes,
and also the African Development Bank and then Africa Reinsurance Corporation, we work together with and we work hand in glove with the housing minister, housing and transport minister, for instance, from Kenya, and we discuss about these issues in a collaborative manner to see how best we resolve the challenges. We have got a very good relationship with them, I must say.
Yeah, so as we wrap up, maybe you can just tell us the next step for Shelter Afrique moving forward.
Okay, that's a very good question. So Chris, you see, the next step for Shelter Afrique is that we want to look at social housing. We want to continuously invest in technology and innovation that enables us to be able to develop low-cost housing at a large scale. We want to look beyond just using bricks. Why can't we use other initiatives in the markets, of course, that will accept that? We want to look at providing a new trade finance product to say, for all the projects we are supporting in Africa, we will also support the developers with trade finance so that when they need to import anything, they are using financing from Shelter Afrique. We also want to continue with the development of housing across all those African states, provided the governments come with land, provided the governments assist with the off-take agreements, for instance, for civil servants and what have you. We as Shelter Afrique will be happy then to come in with the financing. So the future of Shelter Afrique really is, firstly, we're focusing on 3 strategic goals going into the future. We as Shelter Afrique have come a long way. We want to be financially sustainable. What I mean by that is we want to continue to make more profit so that the shareholders get a return on their investment. So we're rolling out housing, but in a financially sustainable manner. So we want to be financially sustainable. We also want to continue to, as a second strategic goal, we want to continue to provide relevance to our shareholders and to be able to achieve development impact. That is through the delivery of housing units across our member states. That is also through the work that our Center of Excellence is also involved with. And then lastly, as an organization. We want to be sustainable as an organization. That is, we want to continue to be a well-governed institution whereby current and local international funders will be comfortable to put money into Shelter Afrique because it gives them the window into investing across 44 countries. And of course, why 44 countries when there's 55 countries in Africa? Into the future, our hope and prayer is that we can now get all the other missing members to be members of Shelter Afrique, so that we now have 55 members of Shelter Afrique. And beyond that, we've also introduced the Class C shareholders, whereby we can now get funding globally now from other international development financial institutions or other foundations that are passionate about developing our beautiful African continent.
Awesome, awesome. I have to admit. And that does it for us today. Once again, many thanks, Mr. Chimphonda, for your top and elaborate presentation. I know if time permits, we would have gone till later, but because of time, we got to call it a day. Many thanks for having us here, I have to admit. Yeah, I'm Chris Owino, and on behalf of the entire team that has made this program possible, until next time, bye-bye, and thank you for your valued company.